This is a sanguinary confession, submitted under Blood Angels, Chapter Rite 17, sealed for the duration of the confessor's active service. This record was unsealed at the request of Chaplain Morthis, 5th Company, Strike Cruiser Crimson Penitent. Brother Aevros is alive. The record was unsealed anyway. Chapter 1. The Taste of Gold. I want to tell you about the moment I understood that what I was feeling was not faith. I want to tell you, and I find that I keep not telling you, keep arriving at the edge of it and stepping back, not because I am afraid. I have not been afraid of anything in a very long time, and I am beginning to think that might be part of the problem. But because there is a particular kind of truth that changes shape when you put it into words. While it stays inside you, it remains manageable, nameable, a thing with edges you have learned to navigate in the dark. The moment you speak it, it becomes something else, larger, the kind of thing that fills a room. I am going to speak it anyway. That is what this confession is for. I will begin with the battle, because the battle is where it became undeniable, though I should tell you, and I am noting this for the record, carefully, because I think it matters, that the battle was not where it began. But I will come to that. The world is called Verath Secundus. It was called. The Administratum will be filing the relevant updates to its designation shortly, I imagine. We had been tasked with pacification of the Hive City's inner wards, a clearance operation, close quarters, the kind of work that does not look like glory from the outside and does not feel like it from the inside. Hab blocks 12 through 29. Thermal density in the range that makes Auspex unreliable. Noise discipline is meaningless. Every corridor is a new problem with walls close enough to touch on both sides. I am good at this work. I want you to understand what I mean by that, because I think the meaning matters, and I think I am going to need you to hold it carefully later. I am not simply effective at close quarters clearance. I am suited to it in a way that goes beyond training, beyond reflex, beyond the 10,000 hours of repetition that produce competence in lesser soldiers. When I am in a corridor with a chains word and an enemy at the far end of it, and the walls pressing in on both sides, something in me settles, quiets, finds the register it was built for. I have always understood this as a gift of the blood. The blessing of Sanguinius made martial, made practical, made mine. I am less certain of that now. The 14th corridor. I know it was the 14th because I had been counting. A habit of mine in clearance work, spatial orientation, breadcrumb discipline. And the enemy came around the corner in a mass. 8 of them. Heretics by the look of their markings. The kind that has had time to fully commit to whatever they've committed to. They made noise. They always make noise. The fully committed ones. As though volume can substitute for what they lack. I did not make noise. My chainsword was already moving when the first of them understood I was there. I am not going to describe the killing in detail, not because the detail is difficult. It isn't. I have described worse in standard after-action reports with less hesitation than I am feeling right now. But because describing the killing is not the point. The killing was fine. The killing was correct. 8 enemy combatants in a Hab block corridor on a world that needed pacifying, removed from the sequence of events efficiently and completely. Nothing in the killing was wrong. It was what I noticed while it was happening that I am trying to tell you about. The smell of blood. I have been in proximity to the smell of blood for 163 years. I know it the way you know the smell of your own armor, your own chapel, your own ship, not consciously, just as the baseline against which everything else is measured, the thing so present it becomes invisible. I stopped registering it decades ago. In the 14th corridor, I registered it, not as background, not as information, as something closer to, I am looking for the right word, and I notice that the right word is making me reluctant, and I am going to say it anyway, closer to music. The specific warm copper heaviness of it, rising in the enclosed space as the work progressed, seemed to have a quality I had no prior category for. Not pleasant exactly. That would be a simpler thing to confess. It was more precise than pleasant. It was right, in the way that a resolved chord is right, the way a note finds its proper place after a sequence of tension, and you feel the completion of it somewhere below thought. I noticed this, and I filed it, and I kept moving, because the corridor had not finished yet. I recited the fourth canticle of the Primarch as I worked. I do this in close clearance. It is a discipline of focus, a way of keeping the mind anchored to purpose, when purpose could otherwise become blurred in the noise and heat and press of near combat. By his wings are we lifted. By his blood are we bound. In his name do we carry the fire that he carried, into the dark that he entered, without hesitation, without remainder. I have recited this canticle in 1100 engagements. I know it the way I know my own heartbeat. In the 14th corridor, it did not feel like prayer. I noticed this too. I am a disciplined man, and noticing without acting on a thing is a skill that 163 years has honed to something reliable. I noticed, and I noted, and I kept reciting, because the words were still true, even if the feeling behind them had shifted into something I didn't have a name for yet. And then the gold. It arrived at the edge of my vision during the last of the 8. At the moment the work reached its completion, a color, saturating the periphery, sourceless, not cast by any light in that corridor. Gold. Not the gold of our armor, not pigment, not reflection. Something deeper than visible, something that seemed to be coming from behind the world rather than in front of it. I had seen it before, in other engagements, always at this precise moment. The peak of it, the full extension of effort meeting the full presence of result. I had always understood it as the touch of Sanguinius, the Primarch's blessing, felt at the moment of its most complete expression. I understood it that way for a long time. In the 14th corridor, standing in the silence after, with the gold still burning softly at the edges of everything, I found that I could not make myself believe that anymore. Not because the experience had changed, because I had. Some calibration had shifted without my permission, and what had read as sacred now read as something I did not have a clean word for. Something that wanted. I stood there. The corridor was quiet. The work was done. Every reading clean, every sensor clear, the hab block ahead waiting to be processed, the mission still moving, still needing what I was there to provide. I stood there, and I was aware, with the particular clarity that arrives when you are being honest with yourself past the point where honesty is comfortable, that I was not ready for it to stop. Not the mission, not the day, the specific thing I had been doing in that corridor, the smell and the weight of it, and the gold. I did not want it to stop. I stood still. I did not act on the wanting. I want that on the record. I did not act on it. I stood there, in control, exactly as I had always been, the discipline holding the way it was built to hold. But I stood there longer than I needed to, and I did not move until I heard Laith's footsteps behind me, and even then, it was not decision that moved me. It was the sound of him, the reminder that I was being seen. I turned around. Laith was 3 meters back, at the junction, helmet off, the way he sometimes works in cleared sections. He was looking at me, not at the corridor, not at the aftermath of the work, not doing the sweep that any trained soldier runs automatically when they enter a completed engagement zone. At me. The expression on his face was not something I had seen from him before. I have known Laith for 60 years, I have catalogued his expressions the way you catalogue those of anyone you trust with your life, not deliberately, just through accumulated presence, the way understanding settles in over decades without announcing itself. I know what his concern looks like. I know his focus, his grief, his rare and specific joy. What he was wearing in that corridor was none of those. It was something earlier than concern, something that had not yet decided what it was. I held his gaze. I said the mission designation and the corridor number and the engagement metrics, the automatic report, the breadcrumbs. My voice was level. I am certain my voice was level. Laith did not say anything. He looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than it should have, and then he looked at the corridor, and then he looked back at me, and he opened his mouth. Chapter 2. What Sanguinius felt. Laith didn't report me. I have spent 11 days trying to decide if that was mercy or something worse. I know what mercy looks like from him. I have received it before, on Dantus IV, when my blade arm was compromised, and he knelt in the mud of a trench and reset the bone by feel, while I bit through a leather strap and refused to make a sound. And afterward he said nothing about the sound I had almost made, and we never spoke of it. That is mercy. That is the clean kind, the kind that sees a weakness, covers it, and asks nothing in return. This is not that. What Laith gave me in the aftermath of the Verath siege was something more deliberate than mercy, and more complicated than silence. He stood in that ruined hab block for a full minute watching me stand among the dead, and then he filed his report, and the report said everything that could be observed from the outside, and nothing about what could not. The report was technically complete. I have read it. I know how to read these documents, what the architecture of them means, which absences are accidents and which are load-bearing. His absence was load-bearing. He built the report around it the way you build a wall around a door you have chosen not to open. He chose. That is what I cannot stop returning to. He made a considered decision in the full exercise of his office and his training and his responsibility to this chapter, and the decision was to say nothing. A sanguinary priest whose function is exactly this, to watch for exactly this, looked at what he saw and wrote around it. I do not know what to call that. I know what it means. It means he is watching. It means he is waiting. It means whatever he saw has not yet met his threshold for action, and I am now, whether I chose to be or not, in the interval between his observation and his judgment. I am writing this confession inside that interval. I want whoever reads this to understand something about what a sanguinary confession is and is not. It is not a private document. Nothing in the chapter is private. This record goes to the priests, to the archive, to whatever process exists, to evaluate what I am and what I am becoming. I know this. I write it knowing this, which means every word I place here is, on some level, a decision about what I am willing to be seen thinking. I want to be precise about that because I think precision matters, and because I think the audience for this document is intelligent enough to understand that a confession written under observation is a different instrument than a confession written alone. I am writing carefully. With that established, let me tell you about the red thirst, because I have been thinking about it for 11 days, and I have arrived somewhere I did not expect to arrive. And I think the honest thing, the only honest thing in a document that is also a performance, is to say it plainly. The red thirst is not a malfunction. I know what we are taught. I know the language we use, the flaw, the curse, the inheritance of Sanguinius, and all his beautiful, terrible blood. I was taught this as a neophyte. I received it as received truth, the way you receive gravity, not something to be questioned, simply something to be understood and managed and lived inside of. For decades I lived inside it exactly that way. I felt the thirst, and I recognized it, and I pressed it back down into the place where the training said it belonged, and I called that discipline, and I believed in the discipline the way I believed in the bolter at my hip, as a tool that functioned correctly when used correctly. What I understood after Vorax is that I had been thinking about this wrong. Not the management of it, the nature of it. Consider what the red thirst actually does. It sharpens, it accelerates, it takes the complex noise of a battle, the tactical calculation, the threat assessment, the management of fatigue and fear, and the thousand small failures of an imperfect body, and it burns all of it clean. And what remains is clarity. Absolute, perfect, uncomplicated clarity. There is a target. There is a weapon. There is the movement between them. Nothing else exists. The chapter calls this the flaw because of what it costs. What it costs is real. I am not arguing otherwise. But consider what it purchases. Consider the campaigns. Consider the walls that did not fall, the people who did not die, the battles won at the precise moment they should have been lost, because a son of Sanguinius reached into the place where the thirst lives and stopped fighting it. The chapter calls that sacrifice. I wonder if it is something more like function. I wonder if Sanguinius, at the deepest level of his design, of our design, intended the thirst not as a failing to be managed, but as a weapon to be aimed. I wonder if the discipline is the flaw. I want to be clear that I write this with full awareness of what it sounds like. I am not unaware of the distinction between a man rationalizing his own deterioration and a man arriving at a genuine insight. I hold that distinction carefully. I simply note that the two things are not always separable from the inside, and that noting this is perhaps the most honest sentence in this document. I note it. I continue. Laith found me in the practice cages on the 9th day. I heard him before I saw him. The particular cadence of his steps, the slight irregularity in the left that he has carried since a ceramite plate failed catastrophically at the hip joint on Scalen's world, and was repaired in the field by a tech marine who was, in Laith's precise words, extremely competent at priorities. He has never lost the irregularity. After 40 years, I no longer notice it, except when I am listening for it, which means I was listening for him before I knew he was there. He sat on the bench at the cage's edge and watched me work through the form sequences. He did not speak for a long time. We have a history long enough that silence between us has texture. Different silences mean different things. The way different weather means different things even when the sky looks the same. This silence had a particular quality I recognized. It was the silence of a man who has decided what he is going to say, but has not yet decided how. I finished the sequence. I lowered the practice blade. "You are favoring your left," he said. "I'm not." "You are. You have been since Vorax, not in a way anyone else would see." I looked at him. The implication was there between us, fully formed, neither of us touching it. After a moment I said, "How long have we known each other?" "Longer than I've known anyone still alive," he said. "Longer than I've known most people who aren't." "Then you know I know you didn't come here to talk about my left." He was quiet for another moment. "Then, I came to tell you that I filed an amended supplementary. Personal observation notes only, sealed to my access level." He paused. "I wanted you to know it existed. Not what it said, that it existed." I understood the distinction, and I understood why he was drawing it, and I wanted to be angry at him for the precision of it, for giving me exactly enough information to understand I was being watched, and not enough to know what he had recorded watching. But I looked at his face, and I could not find anger. I have known this man for 40 years. I have seen him administer the last rites to brothers we both loved. I have seen him carry the weight of knowledge that would buckle most humans, and carry it without complaint. and never once allow the weight to make him cruel. His eyes, when he told me about the sealed record, were not the eyes of a man executing a function. They were the eyes of a man who was afraid, quietly, the way you are afraid when the thing threatening something precious is not an enemy you can engage. "All right," I said. "All right," he agreed. And we said nothing else. And after a while he left. And the silence he left behind was a different kind entirely. I passed the sealed deck on my route between the Reclusiam and the primary arming chamber. This is not a choice I made. It is the ship's geometry. I note this because I want it recorded that I did not seek it out. The door is an unmarked pressure hatch, void-rated, magnetically sealed. The seals are internal. There are no external lock mechanisms because the seals are not meant to keep things out. I do not look at it for long. I never look at it for long. But today, as I passed, I spoke 3 names, very quietly: Casavar, Fel, Duren. Brothers I have served with, men I knew with specificity. Casavar's precise, unhurried tactical mind, Fel's habit of reciting old poetry in the hold before a drop, Duren's laugh, which was too loud for a gene-forged warrior and entirely genuine. They are behind that door now. They are still alive, in the technical sense. What that aliveness constitutes, I do not allow myself to examine closely. I said their names because it seemed important that someone say them. Then I walked on. I do not remember leaving my bunk. This is the sentence I have been constructing for 11 days, and I am writing it plainly because there is no architecture of careful language that makes it less than it is. I do not remember leaving my bunk. I was in the night cycle, and then I was not in my bunk, and those 2 facts are adjacent to each other with nothing between them. No transition, no sensation of movement or waking. Simply before and after. I was standing outside the sealed deck. My hands were on the door mechanism. Not the seal, the outer housing of the mechanism. The cold curved metal of the manual override housing that exists below the magnetic lock. My hands were flat against it. When I became aware of them, they were warm. The metal beneath them was warm. I had been there long enough to transfer heat through my palms into the housing of a sealed door. I do not know how long. I stood very still for a moment. I examined what I was feeling, the way you examine an injury in the field before moving, not to delay, but to understand what you are working with before you decide what to do next. I was not afraid. I want that recorded clearly because it seems important. I was not afraid. I was standing outside the door where 3 of my brothers have been placed beyond the reach of everything they were, in the deep ship's dark, with my hands warm against the metal, and I was not afraid. I was something else. I stepped back. I returned to my bunk. I lay in the dark with my eyes open for the remainder of the night cycle, and I did not return to the door. But I am recording, with the precision that this confession demands, that the thing I felt standing there was not horror at what was behind it. The thing I felt was recognition. Chapter 3. The angel remembers dying. I saw Sanguinius die today. I know that's impossible. I was there anyway. I want to be precise about what I mean by there, because the word is doing significant work in that sentence, and I will not hide behind its ambiguity. I do not mean I experienced a vision. I do not mean I saw something the way you see a fever dream, at a remove, through gauze, with the knowledge of the dreamer intact underneath. I mean I was present. I mean the eternity gate was behind me, and the vengeful spirit was around me, and the air tasted of ozone and old blood, and the specific cold of a ship that has been running its engines too hard for too long. I mean I could feel the weight of my own wings, his wings, against my back, And the weight was the weight of exhaustion, of days without sleep, of a body that was Astartes, beyond Astartes, and still, finally, running out. I mean, I knew what was coming. I walked toward it anyway. That is the part I cannot stop returning to. I knew, he knew, what the room contained, what the War Master had become, the scale of what had been lost in the becoming. There was no uncertainty in those final steps, no miscalculation, no ambush. Sanguinius walked into the vengeful spirit's inner sanctum with full knowledge, and I walked with him, 10,000 years later, in a training cage on the Crimson Penitent, and I felt what he felt, which was not fear. It was love. Grief and love, and something I have no word for. A feeling that exists only at the intersection of total loss and total acceptance of that loss. The feeling of a man who has made his peace with an outcome that cannot be changed and is walking toward it anyway, because walking toward it means something. Because bearing witness to the thing that cannot be stopped is its own form of resistance. Because dying well is the only victory left, and he intended to take it. I have never felt anything like it. In 200 years of war, I have never felt anything like it. I need you to understand that before I tell you the rest. The training exercise was a standard cage drill. 4 brothers, rotating engagement sequences, the kind of structured sparring the chapter uses to maintain edge between deployments. I have run this drill 10,000 times. I could run it in my sleep, could run it blind, could run it with a compromised arm and a damaged helm, and still place every strike where it needed to go. It is not a context in which surprises occur. The gold appeared at the edge of my sight. Familiar now. I noted it the way you note a sound you have learned to recognize. Not with alarm, with attention. It had been appearing in combat, in the spaces between heartbeats, when the body is running at maximum. I had not expected it here, in a controlled drill, with nothing bleeding and no enemy to close with. I noted it. I continued the sequence. And then the cage was gone. Not gradually, not the way a dream dissolves at its edges. Gone, completely, between one moment and the next. The cage, the Crimson Penitent, my brothers, the smell of the ship, the low hum of the recirculation systems, all of it simply replaced with the totality and the physical conviction of the most real thing I have ever experienced, the Eternity Gate. I knew it immediately, not from study, not from the iconography, from the feeling of standing before it, the scale of it, the scale of everything, the palace around it, the battle beyond it, the weight of what the gate was holding back, pressing against the walls of the architecture like water against a hull. The sound was immense, weapons and fire, and the particular human noise of a species fighting for the continuation of itself. A sound with 10,000 years of distance, between me and it, and no distance at all. I turned away from the gate. I walked. I will not try to reconstruct every moment. I am not certain that serving the historical record is the correct purpose here, and I am not certain my memory of a memory that is not mine can be trusted at the granular level. What I will record is what I felt, because the feelings are what remain in me now. Hours later, sitting in this room, writing this document, with hands that have been cleaned and bandaged, and still carry the ghost of something beneath the sterile wrap. I felt his certainty. That is the thing. Not madness, not delusion, not the surrender of a man who has given up. Certainty. The specific certainty of someone who understands exactly where they are in the shape of history, and has decided with full information what their position in that shape requires of them. It was the most coherent I have ever felt another mind from the inside. It was the most coherent I have ever felt anything. There was a confrontation. I will not describe it in detail, because describing it in detail would require me to be present in it again, and I am not prepared for that yet. I will say, there was a moment when the outcome became certain. When the mathematics of it closed, I felt his body beginning to fail. The specific itemized failure of a body that has been pushed past every limit it was built to survive, catalogued in real time by a mind too precise to stop observing even then. I felt what he thought about in those last seconds. I will not record what that was. Some things are not mine to put into words, and I am aware of the irony of a man who has been writing carefully in a watched document for weeks, suddenly claiming something is too private to write. I am claiming it anyway. What I will say is this: it did not feel like an ending. It felt like a completion. It felt like a note held to its full duration and then released, and the silence after it was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of something that had finished being exactly what it was, without compromise, without diminishment. And then I was in the cage, 3 brothers on the floor, not dead. I established this immediately, the reflex of it, the same way you establish a perimeter before anything else. Breathing, injured, one significantly. My hands were wet. The practice blade I had been carrying at the start of the drill was embedded in the cage wall at a height and angle that I could not have achieved in any standard sequence. I do not know when I put it there. 4 minutes. That is what Lath told me afterward, when he arrived. Not the first on the scene, which means there was time between the end of the episode and his arrival. Time in which I was standing in the cage with injured brothers and blood on my hands and whatever expression was on my face, visible to whoever came through the door before he did. 4 minutes for which I have nothing, not even the absence of memory. That would imply a gap I was aware of crossing. There is simply the completion of Sanguinius's last moment, the feeling of that silence, and then the cage, my hands, the blade in the wall, and the particular quality of stillness that follows a violence you cannot account for. I thought, standing there, about the gold, about how it had never looked like a warning to me, about how I had been noting it the way you note something beautiful, and the distinction between noting and welcoming is a line I am no longer certain I have been maintaining. Chaplain Morthis arrived 40 minutes after the incident. I know his reputation. Every brother in the 5th knows his reputation, which is not the kind you discuss directly, but the kind you understand through the language of how people move around a man, how they refer to him in the oblique way that signals something they would rather not examine closely. He is not cruel. He is not unkind. He is a chaplain who has been doing this specific work for a very long time, and the work has worn a particular shape into him, the way water wears shape into stone, not damage, not exactly, but the unmistakable evidence of long exposure to one thing. He sat across from me in the small room off the reclusiam where these conversations happen. I know the room now. I did not know it before today. He did not ask me what had occurred. He already knew. He told me that Lath had been briefed, and that the brothers I had injured were being attended, and that their conditions were not life-threatening. He told me these things in the order that implied, the incident has been contained. The containment is already in process. Your role in the process is to cooperate with what comes next. Then he told me what comes next. Monitored status, restricted deployment profile, increased confession frequency, weekly rather than monthly, reviewed at his level rather than archived directly, mandatory presence at morning reclusium observance, continued service pending evaluation, continued service. I noticed those words. I turned them over. The chapter does not discard what can still be aimed, he said. Not cruelly, not even pointedly. He said it the way you state a physical law, the way you say a thing that is simply and completely true, that exists outside of feeling. That was true before you said it, and will be true after. He has said it before. I could hear the wear on it. I asked him one question. I asked if the evaluation had a conclusion he had already reached. He looked at me for a long moment. His face is not an unreadable face. It is a face that has learned to give back only what it intends to give, which is a different thing. What he gave me in that moment was not an answer. What he gave me was the specific look of a man assessing how much the person across from him needs the truth versus how much they need to continue functioning. The calculus of it running behind his eyes. Your record is not a simple one, he said finally. That is to your benefit and your complication. I told him I understood. He nodded once and picked up the file from the table, and in that movement, purely administrative, the movement of a man completing a meeting, he said, Brother Laith submitted a supplementary observation report at the 11th day after Vorax. I went still. Not the initial filing, he said. A second report. Personal observation notes, sealed to sanguinary access. He paused. Filed after the standard window, which requires a specific authorization to accept late. He had authorized it. The implication sat between us fully formed. I asked what it said. Morthis closed the file. He stood. He told me the morning observance began at 4th bell. He told me he expected to see me there. He left. I sat in the small room off the reclusium for a long time after, and I thought about Laith, who has known me for 40 years and chose silence at Vorax, and then chose, 11 days later, to break it. Not to the archive, not to the full chaplaincy, but to Morthis specifically, in a filing that required Morthis to authorize its acceptance, which means Morthis was expecting it, which means Laith had told him it was coming, which means the two of them had spoken before the report was filed. They had spoken about me. They had made a decision about what to do about me, and the decision they had reached was continued service, pending evaluation. I do not know if that is mercy. I am beginning to doubt that mercy is the correct category. Chapter 4. The Sealed Deck. My name is Aevros. I know that. I am certain of that. I want to be recorded saying that I was certain, because I do not think I will be certain for much longer. I am in the reclusium. It is the 3rd watch. I am alone because I asked to be alone, and because whoever authorizes such requests, Morthis or Laith, or whatever institutional machinery decides what a monitored brother is permitted, decided that alone was acceptable tonight. I am grateful. I find I am grateful for smaller and smaller things as the days proceed, which I think means I am adjusting my accounting for what is available to be grateful for, which is either wisdom or a symptom. I hold the distinction carefully and find it matters less than it used to. I want to talk about Lath. I want to talk about him while I still have the right relationship to the memory, while it sits in me the way it should sit, with the weight it deserves, before anything happens to the part of me that understands why it has weight. This document is a confession. I have been writing carefully in it for weeks, managing what I reveal and how I reveal it, aware of the audience. I am going to stop managing for a moment. I think the record can hold it. He came this morning. 3rd day after the cage incident. First time I had seen him since Morthis closed the file. I heard the step before the door. Always the step first. Always that slight irregularity. The left hip that was repaired in the field on Scalen's world, and never quite returned to what it had been. I have been hearing that step for 40 years. I will tell you plainly that when I heard it this morning, I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not known was locked. He came in and sat down across from me, and we didn't speak for a while. This is a thing we have always been able to do. Inhabit silence together without either of us treating it as a problem to be solved. The silence between us has always been companionable. Today it was something else too, underneath the companionship. Something careful. We were both aware of the careful thing, and we both chose, by unspoken agreement, to sit on the other side of it for a while. He asked about the morning observance. I told him Morthis ran it at pace. He said Morthis always ran it at pace. He said he thought Morthis believed the Emperor didn't need the pauses, which was probably theologically defensible, but made the whole thing feel like a briefing. I laughed. I noted myself laughing. Genuinely, without effort, the specific involuntary quality of a laugh that comes from being known well enough to be found accurately. And I held on to that note. We talked about Kassavar for a while. Kassavar, who is behind the sealed door, whose precise and unhurried tactical mind I miss, in the particular way you miss something you didn't know you relied on until it was gone. Laith had known Kassavar longer than I had. He told me something about Kassavar from a campaign before my time. A small story, specific, the kind of thing that only accumulates over decades, and I stored it carefully. I will not record it here. It belongs to the space between us, not to a document. At the end, when the visit had the quality of ending, when we had both felt the shape of it completing, Lath put his hand on my arm. He has done this before, many times. It is a gesture with a history between us, the comfortable physical language of a long brotherhood. But the way he did it today was different in the way that familiar gestures become different when they are carrying more weight than usual. The same gesture, but pressed deeper, more deliberate. The pressure of it saying something the words around it were not saying. He said, "Whatever you did before the battle, it doesn't change what you are." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Quite. Not because the words weren't there, but because the words that were there were the wrong ones. Or too many, or too large for the space the visit had been. And because answering would have required me to receive what he was offering, fully, and I was not certain I could receive it without the receiving breaking something I needed intact. So I sat with his hand on my arm, and I said nothing. He didn't need me to. He stayed for another few minutes, and then the step retreated down the corridor, uneven and familiar, and getting quieter, and I sat in the reclusium alone, and I thought about what it means when someone who has known you for 40 years, whose entire function in your life is to watch for your failure and report it, looks at the thing you did and decides that the thing does not change what you are. He is not horrified. I know his horror. I have seen it over the decades, the specific quality of his face when something has genuinely fractured his composure. That is not what he brought today. What he brought today was grief. That is worse. I need that recorded. Grief is what you bring when you have already accepted the outcome, and you are in the part that comes after acceptance. Horror implies the possibility of a different ending. Grief has already finished with different endings. Laeth has finished with different endings. I know all of their names. This is something I have always known. The brothers behind the sealed deck. The ones the chapter does not speak of publicly. The ones who exist in that particular administrative silence that is the loudest silence I have encountered in 200 years of service. I have always kept the names. It seemed important that someone keep them. Kassavar, Fel, Duren, Macaris. 4 now. Macaris arrived behind the door 6 days after the cage incident. I was not told this directly. I was told nothing directly, which is itself information, which is the thing the chapter understands about managed silence that I think most people do not. The absence of information is not neutral. It is shaped. It tells you exactly as much as it withholds, if you have learned to read the shape of it. Kassavar, Fel, Duren, Macaris. I have said those names aloud in this room before, quietly, the way I said them when I passed the door in the corridor. Because it seems important that someone say them, because names are the last portable form of personhood a man carries before even that is gone. I said them again tonight, all 4, in order. And then I stopped. I want to be precise about what happened in the pause that followed. I sat in it for long enough to understand what it was, long enough that not saying the thing the pause was waiting for became a decision rather than a hesitation. A made choice, clearly made, in full awareness. I don't think I will say my name after theirs. I don't think I'm ready to make it that real. The chapter continues. I went to the sealed deck tonight. I want to record this with the plainness it deserves. I chose to go. This was not a sleepwalking episode. This was not the unaccounted movement of an earlier night. I was awake, and I made the decision, and I walked the route, and I stood in front of the door. I want to tell you what it smells like. I know how this sounds. I know the register I am using. The same register I used in Chapter 1, in the first pages of this confession, when I described the smell of blood at Vorax and what it had become for me. I am using it deliberately, with full awareness of what using it deliberately means. Some forms of honesty can only be delivered exactly, because softening them changes what they are. The sealed deck smells of copper and warmth, and something beneath those things that is more fundamental than both. A base note, organic, the smell of the interior of living things. Not death, not decay, living. The processes of living bodies operating at sustained intensity, the heat and product of metabolism running at maximum, the smell of the interior of something that is still, in the technical sense, alive. It is not an unpleasant smell. That is what I will not soften. I stood at that door, and I catalogued the smell with the same precision I have always given to sensory information that my body considers significant. And my body considers this significant in the same register, the same channel, the same frequency as the blood at Vorax. Not as a warning, not as wrongness, as something known, as something that has a place in me that was already prepared for it. I stood there for a measured time. I did not touch the door. I turned and I walked back to the reclusiam, and I sat down and I picked up the recorder, and I made myself record this immediately, while it was exact, before the part of my mind that writes carefully had time to decide how to manage it. This is what unmanaged looks like. I am choosing to leave it. The distress signal came at 5th watch. I was still in the reclusium. I heard it through the hull first. The crimson penitent changing attitude, the barely perceptible shift in the engine note that means the course has altered suddenly, which means something has changed in the external situation, which means something has happened that we are now moving toward. Then the vox, ship-wide. Chaplain Morthus's voice, which is not a voice that carries emotion but carries weight, and the weight in it was substantial. Civilian convoy, ambush, the coordinates, our response time, all ships to combat readiness. Casualties, he said. Mass casualties. Blood in quantity, he did not say. But I know what a convoy ambush looks like. I know what the holds of a civilian transport look like when something has come through the outer hull and worked its way inward. I know what that smells like from 200 meters. I was on my feet before the Vox completed. I want to be precise about that. Not standing up as the Vox finished, not rising in response to the order. On my feet before the order was fully given. My hands were already moving through the first sequence of arming. My body had begun the process of preparing for the engagement before my mind had caught up to the decision to engage. I stood in the reclusiam and I held that stillness. The stillness of a man who has observed something in himself and is deciding what to record about it. I am recording it exactly. I don't know if I am going to be good at this, or if I am simply going to be hungry. The order came through. Full deployment. All available brothers. I finished arming. I walked to the embarkation deck. My hands had already been ready for 4 minutes. Chapter 5. What remains? I am told I performed with distinction. The after-action report uses that word, distinction. I have read it 4 times, and I do not recognize the battle it describes. This is not modesty. I want that clear. I am not a modest man, and I have never performed the ritual deflection of a warrior who cannot accept acknowledgement of his own capability. I know what I am capable of. I have 200 years of evidence for what I am capable of, and I have always been able to look at that evidence clearly and say, yes, this was mine. I did this. I recognize my own work. I do not recognize this. The report describes a brother who moved through the ambush site with extraordinary economy. No wasted movement, no excess. Every engagement resolved at the minimum necessary threshold of force. It describes someone who located and extracted 11 surviving civilians from a compartment that had been breached and was losing atmosphere, who made decisions under pressure that the reviewing officer characterizes as tactically mature. It describes, in the careful language of after-action assessment, a warrior who performed with distinction. I have no memory of the 11 civilians. I have no memory of the atmosphere breach. I have no memory of the decisions. I have no memory of arrival, engagement, or extraction. I have the embarkation deck, my hands already moving, 4 minutes before the order. And then I have the debriefing room. And between those 2 points, there is nothing. Not a gap I can feel the edges of. Not darkness or silence, or the sensation of time having passed. Nothing. A clean nothing. The kind that doesn't announce itself. 11 people are alive because of what I did in that nothing. I am trying to find the correct relationship to that fact, and I am not finding it. I know what the correct relationship should feel like. I have felt it before, after engagements, the particular satisfaction of a thing done well in the service of something larger than the doing. That satisfaction has a texture, a weight. It sits in a specific place. I am reaching for it, and the place where it should be is empty, and the emptiness is not painful. It is simply there, the way a room is simply there after the furniture has been removed. The room is still a room. The function is gone. I am recording this in the interest of precision, because precision is the thing I have left. The debriefing with Morthis lasted 40 minutes. I am going to describe it the way it was, which means describing it largely through what did not happen, because what did not happen is the more complete record. He did not ask how I was. I understand this is not cruelty. It is the efficiency of a man who has sat across from enough monitored brothers, after enough engagements, to know that the question opens more than it illuminates. He has made a calculation about what is useful in these conversations, and the calculation does not include how I am. I do not fault him for the calculation. I find myself, sitting across from him, making the same calculation about my own answers. We are 2 men, efficiently not wasting each other's time on things that will not change the outcome. He walked through the report. He noted the civilian extraction specifically, the phrasing deliberate. Specifically noted, he said, not praised, not commended. The specific bureaucratic register of a man who is creating a record and understands the distinction between a record and an opinion. He asked if I had any observations about the engagement I wished to add to the official account. I told him I had nothing to add. He nodded. He moved to the next item. He did not ask about the memory gap. This is the thing I keep returning to. This, specifically, out of all the things he did not ask. He has my monitoring records. He knows the profile of what a first full descent looks like, the physiological evidence of it, the gap that it leaves behind it like a watermark. He knows. He chose the same architecture Laith chose at Vorax, to build the conversation around the absence, to make the absence load-bearing, to not open the door. He did not ask what I remembered. He did not ask what it was like. He did not ask if I was afraid, or if I was changed, or if the version of me that had returned from the nothing was continuous with the version that had gone into it. He did not ask any of this, because the answers would not alter the conclusion he had already reached. And altering the conclusion is not available as an outcome. And asking questions whose answers cannot alter conclusions is inefficient. His conclusion: continued service, enhanced monitoring protocol. Reassignment to the 5th Company's assault cadre, where my profile, the phrase he used, my profile, the language of a man describing a resource, would be appropriately utilized. Appropriately utilized. I am recording those words verbatim because I think they are the most honest thing said in the entire conversation, not as an accusation, as a description. The chapter is an instrument. I am a component of the instrument. The component has a profile. The profile has appropriate utilizations. This is not wrong. This is the chapter functioning correctly, doing the thing it has always done, managing what it cannot cure toward what it can use. The logic of it is clean. I have served inside that logic for 200 years, and I have never found it disagreeable. I am finding it disagreeable now. I note that. I note it without anger, because the anger, if it was there before, is in the same place as the satisfaction, the empty place, the furniture-gone room. I note it the way I note everything now, clinically, at a slight remove, as though the man doing the noting and the man being noted are not quite the same man, or are the same man with less overlap than they used to have. I asked at the end of the debriefing where Laith had been assigned. Morthis did not pause. That is important. The absence of the pause, the absence of any register of the question landing differently than the questions before it. He said that Brother Laith's designation had been updated and that the updated assignment was internal to sanguinary operations. I did not ask what that meant. There is a category of knowledge that, once received, cannot be unreceived, and the edges of this particular shape are legible enough from the outside that I do not need to put my hands on it to know what I am touching. Laith submitted a second report. Laith has been reassigned to an internal sanguinary designation. The second report, and whatever it contained, and whatever Laith said to Morthis before he filed it, has moved Laith sideways in the machinery into a function that does not include continued contact with me. I think I already know what that means. I think I knew before I asked. What I did before the battle at Vorax is not something I am going to record in this document. I want to be clear that this is not evasion. I have been writing carefully in here for weeks, and I have also, in this final chapter, tried to write less carefully. And I think the accumulated evidence of both kinds of writing is sufficient for whoever reads this to complete the thought. The audience for a sanguinary confession is not an audience that requires the explicit. They know what the profile looks like. They know what the progression means. They know what a man who walked into a battle already compromised, who stood too long at the sealed deck, who woke with his hands on the door mechanism, with no memory of walking there. They know what that man is capable of doing and why, and what he might have told himself about it. I am not going to say it. I am going to let them know it in the way that they already know it, which is worse than being told, and which is the only honest courtesy I can offer. Laith knew. He looked at it, and he grieved, and he said, "It doesn't change what you are." He was wrong about that. I think he knew he was wrong. I think the grief was, in part, because he knew. I submitted the completed confession this morning. The sanguinary priest who received it read it in my presence, not quickly, not as a formality, but fully, turning the pages with the attention of a man doing his actual job. I watched his face while he read. I have learned to read those faces over the years. The faces of priests receiving these documents. The micro-expressions of men encountering things they had expected and things they had not. He encountered some of both. His face made its small adjustments. He reached the final section. He read it. He set the document down. He made no comment on the final section. I am grateful for that. I noted the gratitude and found it was real, not performed for the record, not managed, real, which means the place where real things happen is still there. Smaller perhaps, more specific in what it will hold, but there. He sealed the document. He told me the file would remain active and accessible pending standing order. He did not specify whose standing order. I did not ask. I walked out of the reclusium into the corridor of the Crimson Penitent, and I stood in the corridor for a moment, and I looked at what the next days contained. The reassignment, the 5th Company, the assault cadre, the appropriate utilization of my profile, in contexts that will produce blood in quantity without warning. I looked at that future with the flat, clear eyes I have now, and I found it neither frightening nor welcome, and the absence of both those things was its own information. I still see gold sometimes, at the edges of things. I used to think it was beautiful. I have decided to stop thinking about what it is. Record sealed. Administrative notation. Blood Angels. Chapter Archive 5th Company. Assault Cadre, active roster. Brother Aevros, 211 years of service. Reassigned from monitored status to active deployment. 5th Company, per Chaplain Morthus's authorization. Performance assessments since reassignment. Exemplary. Engagement record since reassignment. 16 confirmed operations. 0 friendly casualties. Commendation notations in 11 of 16 after-action reports. Sanguinary confession, compiled over a period of 41 days, remains on file. Classification, unsealed. Access, standing order. The standing order does not specify what the order is standing for.